She called him. What did you say to him?
I asked if it was true.
What if the person you loved most was the one who broke you completely? At 62, Demi Moore has just said the one thing we never thought we would hear, and it has everything to do with Ashton Kutcher. Was it betrayal? Was it regret? Most of all, why did she wait this long to say it? Let's go back to the beginning, where the fairy tale started. The first encounter. Love can begin anywhere and still make an extraordinary impact. However, what if everything starts to go wrong the moment it clicks off? This is a seemingly different love story from the rest. In the spring of 2003, Demi Moore was in New York City doing press for Charlie's Angels, a film that had pushed her in a different direction entirely. It was different, and if you watched Demi play as the villainous Madison Lee, you would understand, since she was once part of Charlie's team before she turned to the dark side. Aside from doing press for the film, that same day, she had just wrapped a high-fashion cover shoot for Vogue with Mario Testino. Meeting Ashton Kutcher was what you might call unplanned, as everything got started with a phone call. Her close friend Sarah Foster rang and invited her to dinner with a small group of friends. Among them, Sarah casually mentioned, would be Ashton Kutcher. At the time, Ashton was already familiar to television audiences from That 70s Show. He had also struck gold with his hidden camera series Punk'd, which had become an unexpected sensation, and now he was in New York to host Saturday Night Live that very weekend. The night began in Ashton's hotel room where the group was gathering before dinner. He had just gotten back from rehearsal and was bouncing around the suite wearing only a towel. Demi excused herself, and while he disappeared for a quick shower, she stepped into the hallway to call home and say goodnight to her daughters. It was a trivial moment for her. She didn't think anyone was listening until the hotel room door opened. Ashton, now dressed, peeked out. He looked shy, and that's when he looked at Demi and said, "That's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard." Then the door closed again. From that moment, everything between them shifted. Demi no longer saw Ashton as a playboy. That perception she had of him was now replaced by something else. She thought he was different, and true to what she thought, he was. At dinner, it was as if no one else existed. Ashton talked about his childhood in the cornfields of Iowa, where life was rooted in hard work. Something was striking in how he told his stories. He sounded just like a little town boy who still held on to dreams he had when he finally found something to hold on to. Like Demi, Ashton had started in modeling, and it seemed like they had quite striking similarities. Across the table, when he told his stories, Demi could feel all of that warmth coursing through her, the kind that makes you forget where you are or how long you've been sitting. When the rest of the group called it a night, neither of them was ready to leave. Demi had been staying in her old San Remo apartment, the one she kept after her divorce from Bruce Willis. She had already decided to sell it, so it was just the floors, the walls, and 3 levels of open space looking out over Central Park. However, it didn't matter. That night she invited Ashton, and the two of them stayed up until sunrise. Their conversations weren't about Hollywood or small talk. Instead, they were about serious topics. They shared soul-deep stories and the parts of themselves not everyone got to see. What's more, it wasn't awkward. The connection between them felt genuine, as if they had known each other long before they met. Unfortunately, by morning, life was pulling them in different directions again. Ashton had to be back at 30 Rock for SNL rehearsals, and Demi had to catch a flight to make it in time for her daughter Scout's school performance. However, there was no denying that sparks were flying behind the scenes. They kept in touch, with Ashton texting in between every wardrobe change at rehearsal and Demi responding instantly. The thread between them stayed tight, and the constant back and forth didn't look like it would fade anytime soon. It felt like the universe wasn't finished with their story just yet when one day Demi arrived at the airport, but the terminal was in chaos. Flights were put on hold because a massive Level 4 storm was approaching. Filled with excitement, Demi pulled out her phone and texted him, "You're not going to believe this, but my plane's not taking off. Do you want to hang out?" Once again, Ashton began texting between sketches, sending messages while wigs were being yanked off and new costumes thrown on. The second the show ended, he came straight to her. However, after that night, the demands of their separate lives kept them apart physically. But it didn't matter. They were constantly on the phone, filling the gap with the everyday back and forth. So what sparked their passion? Something about this love felt different. When Demi started this relationship with Ashton, she wasn't the same version of herself she had been in years past. The time she had spent in Haley, far away from the noise of Los Angeles, had left her even more certain. And around Ashton, she felt safe. She finally felt like she had found the kind of love she had always dreamed of. The kind that feels effortless, not because it's shallow, but because it's real. And maybe for the first time, it wasn't just love, but understanding, warmth, intimacy, and a soulmate. So, the 24th of September 2005 wasn't simply a day. It was a moment that anyone could argue has been brewing since that first flicker in the New York hotel room. On that day, Demi Moore and Ashton Kutcher gathered a few close friends at their Beverly Hills residence and exchanged vows with each other. There weren't hundreds of flashing lights and a show for the universe to gawk at. Nearly 100 guests occupied the space to bear witness to their event. Friends who were present spoke neither of the opulence nor the number of guests at the wedding. What stood out to them was the profound connection that the whole thing had. As a close friend put it, "It was a beautiful wedding." Another guest commented that there was just so much love in the room, and you could feel that. For Demi and Ashton, under that roof, in front of people who knew them, there was nothing to prove. They were simply two people deciding to spend their lives together. Marrying Ashton Kutcher.
I was safe. I had money. He loved my children.
Marrying Ashton Kutcher was a dream come true. He said she made him a better man. He said it with his whole chest, sitting on Oprah's couch, eyes soft, words full of certainty. Yet years later, what broke them wasn't just life, distance, or time. It was a betrayal. And if you look closely, you can see the cracks started forming long before that. In March 2005, during one of Ashton's SNL performances, they decided to address what the whole world had been pointing out ever since their appearance in May 2003 on a double date with Kim Peter. Just as he launched into his opening monologue, Demi Moore stepped out. However, this wasn't a simple cameo. She rocked up in a full old lady mode with thick makeup, a walker, and the gait of an old lady. If you didn't look closely, you would never have guessed who it was. That night, they were poking fun at the elephant in every headline, their 15-year age difference. Demi was 42, Ashton was 27, and the world hadn't let them forget it. By the time September rolled around, they were ready to walk down the aisle inside their Beverly Hills home. Demi Moore and Ashton Kutcher stood before 100 of their closest family and friends and exchanged vows in a Kabbalah ceremony. This spiritual tradition emphasizes the connection to the soul and the pursuit of truth. Demi's daughters were there too, Rumor, Scout, and Tallulah. Also attending was her longtime friend Soleil Moon Frye and Soleil's husband Jason Goldberg, who was also Ashton's producing partner on Punk'd. Soon enough, the girls began to call him MOD, my other dad. On one occasion, he talked openly about how much he loved being part of their lives. "We talk about everything," Ashton said. "It's amazing." Earlier that year, in February, Demi and Ashton had also slipped away to Cabo San Lucas for Valentine's Day, to a resort overlooking the sea. However, photos of the trip circulated widely in the media, sparking various speculations. Did he propose? Did they elope? Was she pregnant? Ashton handled the rumors with humor because when asked about Demi possibly being pregnant, he joked, "Why am I the last person to find out everything? I'm going to be a daddy? God, no one tells me anything." However, beyond the jokes and headlines, they both believed in staying honest with each other. "When I'm putting up a front," Ashton once said on Oprah's show, "she calls me on it, and I call her on her crap." That honesty was rare in Hollywood, maybe even rare in real life. Furthermore, when Ashton looked across that interview couch at Demi and said, "I love being with her, she makes me a better person," it didn't feel like something rehearsed. It felt like something that would last. That's what made what happened next so heartbreaking. No one could have predicted that those very words, the ones Ashton spoke with such sincerity, would eventually shatter under the weight of betrayal. However, while the world soon watched their marriage unravel, the heartbreak didn't start with Ashton. So before we trace the cracks in Demi and Ashton's marriage, we need to step back to the beginning, to the first time she believed in love and the first time it let her down. The beginning of Demi's heartbreaks. Before there was a wedding, before the fame or the photo shoots, There was a girl named Demi Jean Gines, who was born on the 11th of November 1962 in Roswell, New Mexico. Her biological father, Charles Harmon Sr., was gone long before she ever took her first breath, as he had left her mother, Virginia, just 2 months into their marriage. The man she did know, the one she called Dad, was Dan Gines, a newspaper advertising salesman who married her mother shortly after Demi was born. Even Dan, with all his good intentions, couldn't give her a stable home. He moved from job to job, dragging the family from town to town, from Roswell, Canonsburg, and places in between. By the time Demi was 5, she had already learned how to pack up her life into boxes each time the word moving was said. Her half-brother Morgan was born in 1967, and while Dan did his best to raise them, his marriage to Virginia wasn't entirely the best. They divorced and remarried, only to divorce again. Then came the day everything changed forever. The father who had raised her took his life on the 20th of October, 1980. Her biological father, Charles, passed away in 1997 from liver cancer, even though they never shared a relationship. Demi also had half-siblings from Charles's other families, but her relationship with them wasn't close. While she was going through this tragic transition, her mother, whom she thought would have offered her shelter, battled terrible, unhealthy habits. She was arrested more than once for things like drunk driving and even arson. On occasions, Demi tried to help. She helped pay for her rehabilitation at the Hazelden Foundation, hoping for a positive outcome. Unfortunately, halfway through the program, her mother walked out. That was the last straw, and in 1989, Demi cut off contact. 4 years later, in a move that stunned even Demi, her mother posed nude in High Society magazine. Not only did she strip for the camera, but she mocked Demi's iconic Vanity Fair pregnancy shoot and even parodied her clay scene from Ghost. It was humiliating, to say the least. Yet in the final days of her mother's life, Demi came back and reconciled with her just before she lost her life to a brain tumor in 1998. However, this wasn't the only struggle Demi faced while growing up. There were health struggles too. As a child, Demi had strabismus, a condition that caused her eyes to cross, and she needed 2 surgeries to correct it. She also suffered from kidney dysfunction, and a childhood friend's father once described her as looking neglected. Perhaps the deepest wound came when she was 13, when she stumbled on a marriage certificate dated months after her birth. Confused, she confronted her mother. That's how she learned that the man who raised her wasn't her real dad. At 14, she was sent back to Roswell to live with her grandmother, and for a moment it felt like there was a calm, but it didn't last. Within 6 months, her family moved again, this time to Washington State, where her mother had relocated after another broken relationship. Not long after, they moved again, this time to West Hollywood. There, Demi enrolled in Fairfax High School, but her time there was cut short by something far more painful than a move. At 15, Demi was mistreated by Basil Dumas, their landlord, who was 49 at the time. In a moment so devastating that it's hard even to say out loud, Demi later revealed that Dumas claimed he had paid her mother for access to her. Whether it was true or not, Demi would never really know, but the trauma stayed with her.
She's 15 when she comes home one night and an older man they know is in the apartment.
In November 1978, at just 16, she moved in with Tom Dunstan, a guitarist in his late 20s. She also dropped out of high school in her junior year and started working as a receptionist at 20th Century Fox, thanks to a connection through Tom's mother. That job put her close to the industry, and that's where she found the dream she didn't know she had. Inspired by Nastasia Kinski, the 17-year-old German girl who lived next door, she then signed up for acting classes. Her first acting gigs were small at first, with uncredited guest roles on shows like Webb and Kaz. Then, in August 1979, just a few months shy of her 17th birthday, Demi walked into the Troubadour nightclub in Los Angeles and walked out with a man who changed everything. His name was Freddie Moore, a musician almost 12 years older. Freddie had divorced his wife in late 1980, and 6 weeks later, Demi married him, making him her first husband. While Demi was trying to make sense of her past and stitch something stable from it, a boy in Iowa was going through his version of chaos. Ashton was born on the 7th of February 1978 in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, to Diane, who worked for Procter & Gamble, and Larry, a factory worker. He had an older sister, Tausha, and a twin brother, Michael, who had it especially tough. Michael was born with cerebral palsy and had to undergo a heart transplant as a child. That shaped Ashton in ways he didn't talk about for a long time. The fear, the constant worry, the helplessness. He said he would come home, dreading the next piece of bad news. It got so heavy that at 13, Ashton considered jumping from a hospital balcony with the thought that if he gave up his own heart, maybe Michael could live. That moment nearly broke him. But just before he could act, the doctors said a donor heart had arrived. The scars didn't disappear. Ashton threw himself into anything that would distract him from acting, from school plays and parties. Unfortunately, as much as he wanted his pain hidden, he got in trouble while doing that. In high school, he and his cousin broke into the school in the middle of the night to steal money, but they were caught. He was later convicted of third-degree burglary, given 3 years probation, and lost the scholarships he was counting on. However, he fought to turn things around. He enrolled at the University of Iowa in 1996 to study biochemical engineering in the hope of finding a cure for his brother's illness. However, even in college, chaos followed him. He was partying hard and eventually got kicked out of his apartment. He once said that he woke up many mornings and couldn't remember what had happened the night before. From then on, he had to survive. To make ends meet, he sold his blood plasma and worked factory shifts at General Mills. Then, one night, while drinking at a local bar, a talent scout spotted him and convinced him to enter a modeling competition. The prize was a trip to New York City, and Ashton won. That was the beginning of a new life, and so, after that, he left Iowa for Los Angeles, chasing a dream he never imagined he would pursue. That's how two people who were running from pain and another who was trying to heal eventually collided in a city that promised second chances. But what happens when two broken paths fall in love? That's where their story begins, and it's where the cracks begin to show. Finding the perfect love. What kind of love does a woman keep chasing after she has already watched so many versions of it slip away? Long before Ashton Kutcher called her his soulmate, Demi Moore had already lived through her private history of heartbreak. She was just 18 when she married for the first time. His name was Freddie Moore, a musician 10 years her senior, recently divorced, and already world-weary by the time their lives crossed paths. It wasn't some wild romantic whirlwind, not in the way some people may dream about. It was something else. Maybe stability, maybe curiosity, or maybe just the kind of choice you make when you're still trying to figure out who you are. Even before their wedding day, Demi had already started using his last name Moore as her stage name. Unfortunately, the relationship didn't last. They separated in 1983, and by the following year, Demi had filed for divorce. It was finalized in August of 1985. In between those years, there was Timothy Hutton, a brief fling with another actor who didn't stay, and what you might call yet another chapter that didn't quite finish. Then came Emilio Estevez, the son of a Hollywood dynasty. They had worked together on St. Elmo's Fire, and later in Wisdom, a crime drama Emilio wrote and directed himself. Their chemistry on screen was undeniable, and it was even more intense off-screen. The engagement was set for the 6th of December 1986, but life once again interrupted. Before they could make it to the altar, a woman filed a $2 million paternity suit against Emilio. Whatever truth lived behind that headline, it was enough to crack the foundation beneath their feet because the wedding never happened. Then, there was Bruce. Demi met Bruce Willis, and everything changed. Their marriage wasn't some secret affair or brief detour, it was full of life. They got married on the 21st of November, 1987. They built a family. Rumor, born in 1988, Scout, born in 1991, and Tallulah, born in 1994. Those girls became the center of Demi's world, and for a while, Bruce was her home. Nonetheless, even homes collapse. In June 1998, they announced their separation, and 2 years later, the divorce was finalized. After Bruce, there was Oliver Whitcomb, a martial arts instructor far from the spotlight. They dated from 1999 to 2002, and it was 3 years of contrast to the public chaos of her earlier relationships. Then, in 2003, came Ashton. He was younger. However, he looked at her like he didn't care about her past. And maybe that's why she let herself believe that this was it. the final place she had to search for the kind of love she always felt was out there. But you can't outrun your past. The love that starts as rescue sometimes ends as ruin. So what went wrong? How did the man she believed would never betray her become the one who shattered every fragile thing she finally dared to rebuild? The truth about Ashton Kutcher.
Talk about that he was not faithful to you, that he had affairs.
There's a certain kind of love that makes you forget who you were before it. When it breaks, it doesn't just hurt, it rewrites everything. That's what happened to Demi. She didn't just lose a marriage, she lost herself trying to hold on to a version of love that was already slipping away. When that finally happened, she decided to put everything down in her 2019 memoir, Inside Out. They had gone out for dinner one night, with Ashton sipping a glass of red wine when he leaned back and said, almost casually, "I don't know if alcoholism is a real thing. I think it's all about moderation." Now remember that Demi was 42 at the time, yet despite her age, she wanted to be the fun one, and she thought maybe that's what Ashton wanted too. So she tried. The first weekend she got home, she tried drinking. When she got that familiar warmth creeping up her throat, she ended up convincing herself she had everything under control, but she wasn't, not for long. Then came the pregnancy. With each child, your body grows, and with Chaplin, she grew fast. She decided she didn't want anybody to know about this, so she told just a few friends and her girls. The plan was to keep her baby safe from the public and the 1 million journalists
Check up.
At almost 6 months.
And you said you will never forget.
However, just shy of 6 months in, right when they were finally ready to share the news, she lay on the table for her ultrasound, and unfortunately, there was no heartbeat. People talk about miscarriage like it's a medical event, but when you have already imagined their laugh, their bedroom, their tiny fingers, everything goes blank. That's how it felt for her. The worst part of this terrible situation, however, is that she blamed herself. Demi remembered that in the early stages of her pregnancy, she had been drinking again, and worse still, she had smoked in the early weeks before she knew Dot.
Can't even really bring fully to words.
She told herself she had failed her baby, and that's when the pain walked into her life. This grief didn't just stay in her heart, it wrapped around her like chains, but deep down she knew it wasn't okay. With time, she couldn't control it anymore. One time, her agent had suggested a birthday getaway in Puerto Vallarta at Joe Francis's house. Everything was perfect, but for Demi, it became dangerous. She couldn't stop, and unfortunately, the night ended with everyone in the hot tub, and if no one had been there, she might have drowned. When Ashton eventually realized what was happening, he carried her to the bed, soaked and unconscious. However, when she opened her eyes, he was visibly upset. Maybe somewhere in her, she knew that their relationship had started to fade. However, it's a lot safer to turn a blind eye to the reality around you until it isn't. Demi was at the Crosby Hotel getting her hair and makeup done for a premiere when her phone buzzed. A Google alert read, "Ashton Kutcher caught cheating." Her stomach turned, but she hoped it was old news. Perhaps a recycled news article from the past year. Unfortunately, when she read the article, she was wrong. Ashton Kutcher had cheated, and it was the weekend of their anniversary. Ashton did not deny when she picked up the phone to confront him, and a week after her 49th birthday, he moved out. To make this official, Demi released a statement that read, "It is with great sadness and a heavy heart that I have decided to end my 6-year marriage to Ashton." She added, "As a woman, a mother, and a wife, there are certain values and vows that I hold sacred, and it is in this spirit that I have chosen to move forward with my life. I will forever cherish the time I spent with Demi," Kutcher said. "Marriage is one of the most difficult things in the world, and unfortunately, sometimes it fails." On the 16th of December 2012, Ashton Kutcher filed for divorce from Demi Moore, a year after they separated. Demi responded 3 months later, seeking spousal support and attorney fees from Kutcher, who was reported to have earned $24 million the previous year for his role in 2.5 Men. On the 20th of November 2013, Demi Moore and Ashton Kutcher finalized their divorce 2 years after the news of their separation hit the media. Toward the end of her memoir, Demi Moore finally realized what she couldn't see then. She found herself in that state because Ashton felt like the answer to every prayer, and she clung to that feeling like a lifeline. However, he was still growing and still figuring himself out. He was still standing at the beginning of his adult life, while she had already lived a dozen lifetimes. But he had only just stepped off the plane and into her world.
In my case, because I really felt like I had created an addiction to him.
Even after all of that, what haunted Demi the most wasn't the betrayal. It was the way she had disappeared inside it. Now, at 62, she isn't searching for anyone's permission to speak. She's not asking to be understood because what if she hadn't tried to be the fun girl? What if she hadn't blamed herself for things she couldn't control? Above everything, what do you even call that kind of love? The kind that lifts you and swallows you whole. The kind that looks like a fairy tale from the outside, but gradually erodes everything inside you. If Ashton was the answer to her prayers, then what kind of prayers was she making? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Before you go, explore the other videos on your screen.